The bulk of this video was written back when I recorded my opinions video. As I'm editing this, I keep finding new things to respond to, so this video has ballooned up from its original 8-minute run to whatever it is now. I've also discovered some arguments against some of my positions that I find compelling. Never let it be said that I'm too stubborn to change my mind after getting new information. I can't rewrite and re-edit this entire video just to reflect this mind change, so what I'm going to have to do is play you most of the original video with a few interjections, and then come back at the end to tell you where I've changed my mind. Here's the video. A global pandemic has ravaged the world. Joel loses his daughter at the beginning of the pandemic. 20 years later, he's hired by a group called the Fireflies to take Ellie to a doctor to figure out how it is that she's immune.
We're smuggling her?
The delivery takes longer than they expected.
No. No, no, no.
What happens now?
And over the course of their time spent together, they grow to love each other as father and daughter.
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
When they finally get to the Fireflies and their doctor, Joel is told that a vaccine can definitely be made.
Once they remove it, they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine.
But to do so means killing Ellie to get the necessary samples.
But it grows all over the brain.
Joel kills almost everybody in the hospital, including the doctor, thus condemning the world to further infection. When I first played the game, I was under the impression, from actually paying attention to the story, that the vaccine was good to go. I also think the vaccine being real is the very thing that gives Joel's actions any weight. If the vaccine was just possible, or wouldn't have worked anyway, then Joel just did the right thing. It's just a boring, generic, saved the girl ending with none of the moral ambiguity that was intended. The fact of the vaccine being real was later confirmed by the writers of the game and show as their intended interpretation. This guy agrees with me, and then this guy brings up The Death of the Author, which is an essay from French philosopher Roland Barthes. I know I said I was going to play the whole video and then come back at the end, but this video is just getting too long. I have to cut something, and it might as well be this Death of the Author stuff. I was reading whole blocks of text and then responding to it. I was just doing too much. And it doesn't matter anyway, because I've never read The Death of the Author, nor have I read the other essay I was going to mention here, The Intentional Fallacy. And I never will. We here at Clint's Grievances don't do deep. I'm not here to do literary criticism. I'm here to complain about shit that annoys me. The blocks of text I was reading were from articles about the essays. In my defense, the way The Death of the Author is written,
using 40 words where 4 will do,
is very annoying. Also, this guy probably hasn't read it either. The Death of the Author is very politically motivated. There are reasons why a post-World War II French writer wouldn't want to promote hero worship of an author. The Death of the Author is also very artsy-fartsy. And as you may know from previous videos of mine, I don't like artsy-fartsy people. There's a kind of pretentious assholery that exists in the world of art criticism. It's not a perfect comparison, but wherever you have art, you have the artsy-fartsy. So we'll see how this works. I remember watching an episode of 2020 many years ago where a reporter brought 4 pieces of artwork to a museum and had some critics judge them. These critics were busting nuts all over themselves, talking about how great this artwork was and how these people, they knew design, they understood color theory, and they must have had years of schooling. And they all turned out to be just children's finger paints. Again, we're talking about 2 different kinds of art here, but I think there's an overlap. Some critics will use stuff like The Death of the Author and The Intentional Fallacy as an excuse to go buck wild with fan theories, to go on wild flights of fancy, pulling all kinds of stuff from art that's just not there. A lot of critics want to be artists, but they can't be because they don't have any talent. So they try to spin art out of criticism. They want to use art criticism to put themselves in a position where they can leverage proximity to real artists to aggrandize themselves. They don't want to critique art as much as they want to be praised for their critiques and supposed insights. Like a snake eating its own tail, they sniff their own farts so hard that their heads get suctioned up into their own assholes, enveloping themselves deeper and deeper until they just roll up and blink out of existence. But none of that has anything to do with this guy because he's not using the phrase in a political or artsy-fartsy way. There's something called formalism, which I guess I'll have to get to later. I will play the last part of my response from the original video, but first let me try to explain why I responded the way I did. When I was a kid, and all through my teens really, I constantly had adults telling me that I could draw, that I was a good artist. I guess I had a natural aptitude for it, but I was lazy and I never put the work in to actually become a good artist, to actually reach a professional level. So I respect people who've done that work. I respect people who've cultivated their talent. I've had many conversations, unfortunately, both online and IRL, with people who think that they know a story, a world, a character better than the author who created them. These people will make fan edits of movies and then swear they're better than the original. And they'll invoke the death of the author to justify their own headcanon and to justify harassing the real author online when he doesn't canonize their fan fiction. You can call me an elitist snob if you want to, and you can also kiss my ass. But if an author does speak on his work, it can't be the case that some fan theory holds just as much weight as his word. What if a fan's interpretation of a movie is based on a misunderstanding of the dialogue? Or what if we took a shit break? I myself took a shit break during the scene where Genki and Pete, where Ned and Pete hack the suit. According to Wikipedia, authorial intentionalism is the view that an author's intentions should constrain the ways in which a text is properly interpreted. I actually do believe in authorial intentionalism. I believe the author is the god of the world he creates, and I will take the author's word over any fan theory any day. No one can know the history of a fictional world or the minds of its characters better than the author can. Some audience members are just stupid, and they interpret things in stupid ways. What if someone told you that they believe the narrator and Tyler Durden were actually two separate people?
Because we're the same person. That's right.
There are already people who believe the narrator's name is Jack, which the movie doesn't say at all.
It's an article written by an organ in the first person. I am Jack's medulla oblongata. There's a whole series of these. I am Jill's nipple. I am Jack's colon.
The Dark Knight Rises goes out of its way to tell you that Bat Bruce is still alive. Batman supposedly piloted the Batwing over the ocean when the bomb blew up, right? He was in the Batwing. Okay, how did the spotlight get fixed? How did this guy get the coordinates to the Batcave? And then you have this scene with Fox and his team of engineers talking about how the autopilot had been fixed. All of this means that Bruce is still alive. Yet some people believe that Alfred is imagining this. Why would Selina be in Alfred's fantasy? Here's an example of people fundamentally misunderstanding the media they consume. I saw this while I was editing. I had to put this in here. Many of these people think that Spider-Man can beat Homelander. These people are unable to grasp why Homelander is such a big deal and big problem in the world of the boys. Yes, he might be the weakest of all the Superman clones, but Superman is so OP that even the weakest version of him could still easily be vastly stronger than Spider-Man. I saw a video from a guy who thinks Spider-Man can beat Homelander. Anytime a comment disagrees with him, he responds, "You want to hop on live and debate?" Yeah, that one kind of got away from me. I went off on a rant about stuff that had nothing to do with anything. It's okay, though, because it gave me the opportunity to reference superheroes again, which is apparently a thing you can't do. Apparently, you're not allowed to reference one kind of story when talking about another kind of story, so you'll see later on, you'll see. I might clip this and put it in a video of its own. Content's content, right? We'll see. Anyway, back to the video. And Butcher's entire purpose is to figure out how to kill him. Anyway, I wonder if anyone who would use the death of the author against me actually agrees with Kim Horcher's IGN video, which I responded to in my own video. You might agree with her conclusion that the vaccine wouldn't have worked, but if you agree with the argument she used to get there, you're contradicting yourself. Her argument refers to science outside the story to dispute science inside the story, which violates the death of the author. You're only supposed to consider what's inside the story. But none of this matters anyway because this guy's just using it wrong. Most of the time I hear the death of the author being used, it's being used incorrectly. A lot of people say it when they really mean separate the art from the artist. Some people use it to shoot down other people's criticisms, which violates the idea put forward in the death of the author that everyone's critique is equally valid. And other people use it to try to undo the reality of story elements they don't like. TV Trope says Bart's argument was based on close reading, i.e., the scattered random sentences in a story and other bits of detail, rewatch bonus and so on. Rewatch bonus being the stuff you notice when rewatching something, not, as the trope is usually applied, on basic fundamental story beats and major plot points in which the author's intent is far more conscious and clear. Bart was challenging the assumption that the author had clear and conscious intention about every part of his work, but was not proposing that the author had no intentions at all. This trope does not mean that there is no such thing as canonicity for a work's events, which is a common misinterpretation of this theory used to justify canon defilement. It only proposes that questions not explicitly answered by the text of the work cannot simply be resolved by word of God or by trying to guess the author's intentions. People use the death of the author to complain about arcs they don't like, or characters they don't like, or even actors they don't like. And then they want to get mad when the writer uses or refers to that stuff in later chapters, as if they have some kind of ownership over the stuff they like just because they like it. I talked a bit about that in my AI art video. It was already bad enough when we had overzealous fans tweeting at real authors to tell them all about how the half-baked fan fiction they have trapped in their skulls is better than the real author's current run on any given book he's writing. Or telling that real author about how morally wrong they are for not incorporating into the real canon of the actual story their bullshit Rule 34 inspired fanfic shipping of two characters that have no business actually being together. You can't just interpret Superman as not being from Krypton, or Spider-Man not being bitten by a spider, or Blade not being half vampire. You can't just use the death of the author to rewrite stuff you don't like. The fact that the vaccine would have worked is a canonical major plot point and cannot be undone by reference to the death of the author. From the moment Joel wakes up in the hospital, the end of the game and show are virtually identical. The moments before are different though, in a way that I think the game did better. In the show, Ellie and Joel are tear-gassed and Joel is knocked out while Ellie is dragged away. Presumably then, before Ellie was put under anesthesia, she may have had the opportunity to reunite with Marlene and speak to the doctor. In the game, Ellie nearly drowns, and Joel is knocked out while trying to revive her. The game doesn't tell us if Ellie ever woke up before they prepped her for surgery. We can assume she didn't from the conversation that Ellie and Joel have in the car. I think the game has it better here because if Ellie never had any interaction with the Fireflies, there's no chance they could have told her something that would contradict Joel's lies.
Turns out there's a whole lot more like you, Ellie. People that are immune. There's dozens, actually.
And he is lying here. As I said before in my other video, some viewers just don't want to believe it. There are no other immune people known of in the world of The Last of Us. But let's re-examine this moment though, because these two commenters seem to be a bit confused. Before Joel's mass murder in the hospital, Ellie nearly drowns. While Joel is trying to revive her, some Fireflies walk up and they give orders.
Hands in the air!
She's not breathing.
Hands in the fucking air!
Joel doesn't follow the orders and they knock him out. Remember this guy?
Please!
Holy shit.
Help!
He ain't even hurt.
At this point, these two Fireflies don't know who these two people are. This could be a ruse.
Get help! Help him!
Some might say that the entire reason why these Fireflies are in this hospital in the first place is because they're waiting for this man and this little girl to show up. So these two particular Fireflies should have been able to instantaneously recognize these two people as the exact two people that they're waiting for. This is not true. The Fireflies are actually waiting for a grown man, a little girl, and a full-grown woman. Unless they found Tess's corpse back at the failed rendezvous, which at this point happened over a year ago. I don't think the Fireflies, after all this time, have any reason to be holding out hope that Joel would be able to figure out where all their different bases are and know that this is the exact one he should bring her. Whatever. That's just speculation on my part. These two commenters say that the Fireflies reneged or fell back on the deal they made with Joel and Tess. The deal was that Joel and Tess transport Ellie to the Firefly doctor in exchange for a shit ton of weaponry.
You hand her off, come back, the weapons are yours. Double what Robert sold me.
Why would you give this guy, in this moment,
No, you take me to her. You take me to her right now!
a fucking arsenal? I never said that the Fireflies were the absolute good guys, just that they were closer to it than Joel, which is still pretty far away. If the Fireflies were anywhere near as bad as these commenters make them out to be, why didn't they just kill Joel while he was unconscious? They let him wake up, they explained to him what they were going to do, and then they were going to let him leave, even after he was threatening to them. I do believe they should have woken Ellie and given her the choice. But we can know from the conversation between Joel and Marlene,
It's what she'd want. And you know it.
and the way Ellie treats Joel in the sequel, what that choice would have been. And Joel knows what that choice would have been too. Joel himself has every reason to believe the vaccine was good to go, yet he kills everybody anyway.
How dare you?
I saw this video while I was editing, and so I gotta try to squeeze this in here. This video is insane to me. Full of conjecture, assumption, guesswork, whatever you want to call it, it's all here. He seems to be, I don't know if catastrophizing is the right word, but he seems to be assuming that the Fireflies, behind whatever they do, have the worst possible intentions and motivations. That they are consciously evil, except for Marlene. He also promotes the idea that the vaccine wouldn't have worked, which I've already dismantled. And this idea that I've seen going around that the Fireflies are perpetual fuck-ups who will always fail at everything they try. We know the Fireflies are losing their struggle against Fedra. Also, after they helped Pittsburgh overthrow Fedra, the people of Pittsburgh turned on them. Other than that, we don't know enough about the history of the successes and failures of the Fireflies to know that they could never do anything right. I mean, they got at least one thing right.
The vaccine.
His argument that the Fireflies are evil seems to be based on 3 points. The first is this scene again. I don't know if this is an official fallacy, but the argument here seems to be the argument from pearl clutching. He sees this as 2 evil and sadistic soldiers assaulting a man performing CPR on a child. What shame, what cruelty. I see this as a matter of what would be considered proper procedure in this situation. Like, is this proper procedure? Gain control of the situation, contain any threats, and then do your own CPR, which they must have done, right? They must have done their own CPR on Ellie. As I said before, given the limited knowledge they had in this moment, knocking Joel out was caution, not evil.
Welcome to the Fireflies. Easy. You got hit pretty hard. Patrol didn't know who you were. Patrol didn't know who you were.
Patrol didn't know who you were.
I'm not saying they couldn't have taken a bit more time to assess the situation, but to assume in the few seconds over which this thing happens, these people instantly knew this CPR was real, but they knocked him out anyway because they don't give a fuck. That's not reasonable. It's not a reasonable thing to assume.
Sorry about that. They didn't know who you were. They didn't know who you were.
They didn't know who you were.
The second piece of evidence that the Fireflies are evil is the fact that this guy was rude.
I said move.
He was discourteous to Joel as he was escorting him off the premises.
Give me an excuse.
Therefore, the Fireflies are evil. Couldn't possibly be the guy was trying to assert some form of dominance and authority over Joel in that situation so as to attempt to dissuade Joel from trying anything, right?
I said keep walking.
Failed miserably anyway. The third piece of evidence is this recording.
They asked me to kill the smuggler. I'm not about to kill the one man in this facility that might understand the weight of this choice.
Apparently, this audio file means that the Fireflies, all of them except Marlene, wanted to kill Joel. For no apparent reason, just for convenience sake. Maybe this is true. Maybe the Fireflies, all of them except Marlene, wanted to kill Joel because fuck him. Funny thing about the word they, it could mean 2, it could mean 1 billion. There are no scenes of Marlene and any other Fireflies having this conversation. It could just as easily be that only some of the Fireflies wanted to kill Joel because they recognized that he would have a problem with Ellie's surgery and would become a threat. Evidence of that assessment of Joel being correct is all over the floor in that hospital. In this recording, Marlene says that asking her if they could do the surgery was a formality. Maybe if she had ordered them not to do the surgery, they would have disobeyed her orders and done it anyway. So Marlene expresses concern that the Fireflies may be willing to disobey her direct order. Okay, also the Fireflies are evil and want to kill Joel. Yet at the end of the game, he's still breathing. Maybe, as soon as they were out of Marlene's earshot, this guy would have put one in the back of Joel's head. We can speculate on these things. We can attempt to read the minds of fictional characters, but at the end of the day, there are things we can't know and claims we can't reasonably back up. Everyone makes assumptions when reading books or watching movies and TV shows. We all speculate about characters' motivations and things that might have happened off screen, but I like to think that my assumptions are perfectly safe. Of course, I would say that about myself, but I really don't believe that any of my assumptions are based on the completely unknowable. For example, the thing I said before about CPR. I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that these Fireflies must have done their own CPR on Ellie, off camera. Why? Because Ellie is not dead or retarded. It doesn't take that long without oxygen before your brain starts turning to slush. This guy, on the other hand, seems completely unrestrained by reason and is extrapolating far beyond what's logical. Everything he says about Marlene, her motivations, her opinions of other people and their emotional states, an entire would-be story arc about what must have happened to her on her journey from Boston to Salt Lake City, the alleged antagonism and cruelty of the soldiers under her command, and long history of failure and incompetence. This is all pure fan fiction. And, once again, he's wrong on the vaccine.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that bullshit.
I left this comment on Kim Horcher's IGN video, and I repeated it in my own. This guy disagrees with me. If you think the game or show has no evidence to prove they would have taken Ellie's life, even if she said no, then you have poor logic. They drugged her for a reason. Did they drug her, or did they just not wake her from nearly drowning? Maybe they drugged her right after stabilizing her from nearly drowning so that they could run tests. Did they need to drug her to run those tests? If so, they wouldn't have known they needed to remove her brain before drugging her and running those tests. So you have no point here. They had no intention of waking up Ellie. You can't know that. Also, the doctor failed multiple times. You can't know that either. There were no other immune people for him to fail on, and never had more than a day's worth of research on Ellie's condition, yet came to the conclusion that she had to die. That's very unscientific and unethical. I guess I agree with that. There are also no vaccines against fungal infection. Yet. There are no vaccines yet. Vaccines don't exist until people make them. The entire point of bringing her here was to see if they could make a vaccine or a cure. The game and show say yes, by the way. Or any way to mass produce said vaccine in the world of The Last of Us. The game and show disagree with you. You want to counter these arguments by saying that we have to go by the lore of the story instead of using real-world logic. You are desperate enough to prove your point, I'm desperate enough to prove my point, by comparing this to using real-world logic to superhero franchises. This guy doesn't know how examples work. Every single kind of story that you could ever come across, no matter how grounded or fantastical, requires you to judge it by its internal consistency and suspend some level of disbelief. And yet you admit this game's universe is grounded, which you know makes it a lot of difference from Marvel or DC. You know this, but still somehow think this supports your argument. If you know how to suspend your disbelief in regards to one kind of story, you should know how to suspend your disbelief in regards to another. How do you not understand that? Also, I admitted it was more grounded than superheroes, but it's still not that grounded. It's a post-apocalyptic world where people turn into fungus monsters. This universe was written to be grounded. There is no way you can avoid this fact. I thought I admitted it. In this grounded universe, grounded again, you want me to believe an unethical doctor who is a vet is somehow justified in taking Ellie's life with barely a day's worth of research to make that conclusion. I don't want you to believe that. The story does. You even go so far as saying, I go so far as saying that a vaccine was possible because the writer said so. Yet Neil admits he should have done more research. How do these two things contradict me, and how are they in conflict with each other? If Druckmann wishes he had done more research so that he could have written a better pseudoscience explanation of how the vaccine definitely would have worked, then that just proves my point. He also admits the universe is grounded. Again with the grounded. This guy, superheroes are not grounded enough for him. He wants more grounded. Okay, I'll give you a more grounded example for suspension of disbelief. We'll see if this is grounded enough for you. There is absolutely no way that Monica and Rachel would have been able to afford that apartment in Manhattan. Too big, too expensive. They wouldn't have been able to pay the rent on their salaries. There is an in-universe explanation for how they could afford it. It's called rent control, which the show itself knows is bullshit.
Because of rent control, it was a friggin' steal.
They couldn't live there, and we know it. But you're not watching Friends, constantly thinking about it because you suspend your disbelief. We'll see if this guy learns how examples work. If you want to believe that this delusional doctor and this ragged militia in this grimy-ass hospital couldn't have made, mass-produced, and mass-distributed a vaccine, even though the story says so, then you're no longer doing critique, you're doing fan fiction. Your problem isn't with me, it's with the writers. You can go find them on social media, and you can explain to them all about how they fucked up when they were writing the story. Good day to you, sir. This guy has written the most generic comment I've ever seen. This logic could be applied to any character in any story or even anybody in real life. This girl is a face model. They didn't scan her entire body to make this character, only her head. I don't understand these people who are obsessed with the attractiveness level of video game characters. As much as I appreciate a nice big pair of titties, I've never been able to play a video game with one hand. Let me ask you a legitimate question. Since people keep saying we just paint Joel in a perfect light, I never said that. So if I took your son or daughter from you, she's not his daughter, kidnapped them and had government workers or people with government tech, and we sat down and told you, Clint, listen, your son or daughter is the cure. Again, she's not his daughter. And we need to synthesize to save everyone, but we don't know if it'll work. We do know that it would work. And when we do this, they will die regardless of whether we synthesize a cure or not. Again, we do know that this would work. What would you do? Cry and feel bad about the fact that your daughter or son, again, she's not his daughter, is going to die and just accept it? What would you do? I'd kill everybody in that motherfucker and take my kid. I never said Joel wasn't relatable. When I say Joel is a bad guy, I'm not saying he's evil. I'm not saying he's like David. Joel is a very damaged man who made a very human choice that happened to condemn the rest of the world to a slow death. He did something beneficial only to himself in the short term, but detrimental to everyone else in the long. Imagine you lived in this world and you knew what Joel did. You found out somehow. And then at some point after that, you get infected or a loved one gets infected and you have to be the one to put them down. Would you not lay any blame at Joel's feet? Ellie's one life versus the lives of anyone who gets infected from this point forward, who could otherwise be vaccinated. If this were a trolley problem, there's a lot of people that could easily flick this switch. We don't know what kind of person Joel would have become had Sarah lived. We don't know if he would have ever become a smuggler or the kind of person to be on both sides of an ambush like this. We don't know if he would have ever met Marlene or Ellie and been hired to transport her. If he had been hired to transport her, would he have made the same choice in the end? We don't know these things. We can't know these things. Maybe he would still make the same choice. Maybe he would still love Ellie as a daughter. And maybe you don't need to lose one kid to know that you wouldn't want to lose another. But I do believe that his view of Ellie as a daughter figure and his actions in that hospital are greatly influenced by the trauma of the brutal killing of his actual daughter, Sarah. He even says to 14-year-old Ellie, you two would have liked each other.
I think the two of you would have been good friends. I think you really would have liked her. I know she'd have liked you.
I bet I would have.
She would have liked you.
In his mind, Sarah is still that little kid, but she would have been about 33 years old at this point. His trauma and, yes, selfishness condemn the world to further infection. Appreciate the sub though, man. Thanks. I talked a bit about this in the last video, so I'm going to try my best not to repeat myself too much here. There are people who hate The Last of Us 2 because they're upset about certain events that happen in the story, events that I won't spoil for you here. These people could be called the legitimate haters of the game. There are other people who hate the game because it has lesbians in it, and a trans kid, and a girl with big arms who can beat up men. These people practically campaigned against the game. They relentlessly shit-talked the game before it came out and then review-bombed it as soon as it was released. These people could be called the illegitimate haters of the game. And it can be difficult to tell the difference between these two types of haters because the illegitimate haters will often co-opt the arguments of the legitimate haters in order to spread as much hate for the game as possible while disguising their real motivations. I'm not saying any of this to defend The Last of Us 2. That game is average at best. It's not a 10, but it's definitely not a 0. It's a better game than the first one because even though the story isn't as good, the gameplay is better. The reason I'm making this video is to respond to the comments under my last video as if those comments were being made in good faith, as if they were made by the legitimate, yet mistaken, fans of The Last of Us 1 who didn't like The Last of Us 2. But I would like to take this opportunity to tell all of the illegitimate Last of Us 2 haters to go suck a dick. If you were merely disappointed by the events of the story of The Last of Us 2 and are also a reasonable person, you would have gotten over it by now. But the fact that there are still active subreddits and forums dedicated to hating this game is fucking pathetic. Fuck these people. And then there's this guy who still posts this same comment on every IGN Facebook post. Fuck this guy. And fuck the guy who tried to organize a smear campaign, an actual smear campaign against girlfriend review. Hold on 1 second. And fuck the guy who tried to organize a smear campaign against girlfriend reviews because they dared to make a video praising the game. There are still people, 4 years after the game was released, sending death threats to the face model and actress that played Abby. And some of these people are sending those death threats to the actress Baby. It's just a fucking video game. Why are you this mad? How can you be this pathetic? If you're watching this, if you've ever sent a death threat to these people, matter of fact, if you've ever sent a death threat to anyone, fuck you. Anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So that was the original version of this video. Here's where I'm supposed to tell you where I changed my mind. And I will do that in a moment. But first, let me say this. My tone in these videos might come across as mean or harsh. I'm just blunt. That's all it is. I bluntly and honestly present my true opinions in these videos. That's all I'm doing. I don't make these videos with the express purpose of offending people. I'm not actively trying to shit on anyone. So if you feel personally slighted by anything I've said here or elsewhere, it's probably because you deserve it. For example, one of the things I had to cut for time from the original video was a response to this ridiculous Reddit post. This thing reads like it was written in universe by an agent from Fedra's Ministry of Propaganda. It's a completely ridiculous, pro-Fedra, anti-Firefly piece of bullshit that starts off almost immediately by justifying Sarah's killing and then just gets worse from there. Let me save you from the lengthier response and just give you some highlights. Here he says the Fireflies bombed a checkpoint and then started firing wildly all over the place, but you can't see any Fireflies on screen, so you can't say they fired wildly all over the place. Here he claims that this
Do it.
Please!
Eyes forward.
is a merciful, lethal injection of what are probably highly valuable drugs. Think about that. In order to be as humane as possible to someone who's basically already doomed, they sacrifice extremely useful and expensive medical supplies. How the fuck does he know how useful or expensive these medical supplies are? This could be Drano for all we know, when it would be so much cheaper to just shoot them. That's a sign of humanity. A humane execution would be a painless one, and a bullet to the head would be a lot less painful than whatever this is. And remember, Ellie would have tested positive on this device. She would have been killed just as quickly with no chance to explain her immunity. Here he praises Fedra for doing a wonderful job keeping the people fed, even during the lean times, but completely downplays and dismisses the concerns of civilians who think that Fedra is holding out on them, which is the entire reason why Pittsburgh blew up.
Give us our rations. Why wouldn't they give them their food?
Sometimes they ran out. Most times they just held on to it.
That never happened in Boston.
Trust me, it happened all the time.
He talks about two NPCs complaining rather loudly about lack of food, and soldiers standing right there listening to them complain.
I hear it's another half ration week. Are you fucking kidding me? That's 3 weeks in a row now.
Well, what are you gonna do?
This is such fucking bullshit. I bet those uniforms over there, they don't get half rations.
Keep your voice down. What's wrong with you?
Whatever, I don't even care anymore. Let them take me.
Just be quiet.
These two NPCs are only speaking this loudly for us, the player, to hear. And one of them seems to be very worried about the other getting taken away for merely complaining. I believe the term for this is extraordinary rendition. This text is from a wiki he linked. It talks about how Fedra and the military kill people for convenience sake and for protesting lack of rations. Of course, he ignores all that and blames Pittsburgh on the Fireflies. Here he says the Fireflies in Pittsburgh burned Fedra soldiers alive, but the wiki he links proves him wrong. It was the citizens of Pittsburgh that lit those soldiers up, not the Fireflies. Lastly, here he compares the scene where Sarah is murdered by the military to Ellie's near drowning, where Joel is merely knocked unconscious, and somehow claims the military was gentler. This guy would let Fedra run a train on him. Unfortunately, only a few commenters here have figured this out. He also makes some arguments against the efficacy of the vaccine and gives links to real-world science on fungus, which is the same mistake made by Kim Horcher, both of which I'll get back to in a moment. Here's a list of things people still believe about this game. Ignore points 1 and 4 for a moment. Someone please give me the evidence that supports the rest of these points, because I can't find any online. For example, the only evidence I can find for point 2 seems to be the fact that Jerry once helped a zebra. And for number 3, the only evidence is individual examples of individual Fireflies fucking up. One guy got caught sleeping on watch duty and another guy got bit by a monkey. So that means all the Fireflies are incompetent buffoons. Okay. As for points 5, 6, and 7, this guy calls the Fireflies terrorists. For fun, I asked ChatGPT what's the difference between terrorism and guerrilla warfare. And this is what I got. I'm sure some idiot in the comments is going to try to roast me for using ChatGPT as a source, but you'd only be roasting yourself. This robot spit 15 paragraphs of hot fire with this shit right here. I'll let you read it. The Fireflies were not terrorists. They were guerrilla fighters engaged in guerrilla warfare against a regime that was corrupt, cruel, and totalitarian. The stated goals of the Fireflies were to overthrow Fedra, bring back democracy, which is a good thing by the way, and to find a cure or vaccine for the pandemic, which is what they were trying to do with Ellie. The Fireflies only attacked military targets, never civilian. They did not want to strike fear in the civilian population. In fact, they directly appealed to civilians for support, which is where the "when lost in the darkness, look for the light" audio comes from.
Remember, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Believe in the Fireflies.
America is supposed to have a set of checks and balances, legal, non-violent avenues to deal with corrupt government officials. But the setting of this game is no longer America. Again, according to his own wiki, which he linked, the individual QZs have become military police states or military dictatorships. If you join the military, you might be okay, if you advance up through the ranks. But if you don't join the military, you're fucked. You'll be a worker bee, and you'll be underpaid and underfed. There is no voting, there is no protesting because you'll get shot. Complain about lack of food, and the government will make you disappear. I am not one to condone political violence, but guerrilla warfare against a regime as corrupt as Fedra is probably justifiable. Anyway, I still think that much of the pushback against this game is based on bigotry, though maybe slightly less than I thought, slightly. As I said, if you like something and are then disappointed by its sequel, that doesn't justify years of hate campaigns. Any reasonable person let down by The Last of Us 2 should have gotten over it by now. But what I say here is meant only for those who merely disagree. And now for the big reveal. So, would the vaccine have worked? The answer is yes. But, did the writers do a good job of conveying that to the audience? Absolutely not. As I said before, when I first played the game, I was under the impression that the vaccine would have worked. Shortly after completing the game, I saw an interview with the writers where they said the vaccine would have worked, so I assumed that my original assumption was correct. The writers did a very good job when writing the emotional aspects of the story, the relationships between characters and such, but they didn't do a good job writing the medical aspects of the game. When researching the death of the author, I came across something called formalism. Formalism is basically the idea that any claim about the nature or meaning of a story must be backed up by evidence found within the story itself. Nothing outside the story, like wikis or links to real-world science, count as evidence for your claim. This feels to me very much like the death of the author, but without all the artsy-fartsy baggage. And I can get like 99% behind this. I'll get to the other 1% in a moment. When a writer writes something and then releases that something to the public, they want that material to be absorbed by the public in a particular way. Even if it's purposely open-ended or mysterious, there's still intent on the side of the author. You're never going to get 100% absorption. There will always be some small portion of the audience that won't get what you're trying to convey. But if it's close to 50-50 and you didn't intend for it to be 50-50, then you, as a writer, have a problem that you can't blame on the audience. You heard me say a few times throughout the course of this video that there are things about this game's world that we can't know because we don't have enough information. I still think that about most of these points. Been a while since I played the game though. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I didn't collect all the lore items or artifacts or community notes that were strewn about the game's world. But I think that we only got a chance to see a slice of the Fireflies operation. And the second game confirms that there are more Fireflies out there in the world trying to reform and rebuild. When it comes to real-world science, there are ways you can apply real-world science to stories. But why apply this real-world science to the vaccine for the fungus, but not the fungus itself? Why you half-steppin'? Cordyceps do not infect people in real life. You're willing to suspend your disbelief just enough to believe that cordyceps can infect people in this game, in spite of real life, but you're not willing to believe that a vaccine could be made in this game because of real life. That doesn't make sense. If you want to argue that the writers didn't do a good job of making it believable that the vaccine could have been made by these people in these conditions, that's fine. Again, I agree, bad writing. But claiming the vaccine couldn't be made by anybody in any conditions because real life, that type of thinking nullifies all of fantasy and science fiction. Either a fictional vaccine for a fictional fungus could be made and all these people are infected with cordyceps, or a fictional vaccine for a fictional fungus could not be made and all of these people are just dope fiends. This guy, whose comments are among those that made me change my mind somewhat, writes what he thinks should be or would be proper procedure when dealing with a patient like Ellie. This guy, who quit this debate in spectacular fashion, calls it speculation and conjecture, which it is because that's all any of us are doing. It could be that Ellie is a valuable source of testable material and could be left alive to give more and more. But when Marlene tells Joel that the doctor needs samples of the fungus, Joel says it grows all around the brain, so it could also be the case that the only valuable material in Ellie's whole body is the fungus in her head, in which case you either crack the egg or hope that whenever Ellie does die, a sufficiently skilled doctor is nearby to take those samples. But coming to the conclusion that her death was necessary so quickly after Ellie's arrival, yeah, that is bad writing. That is where I change my mind. As far as that 1% goes, I will still hold the author's opinion as more valuable than the average fan, especially if the story is ongoing. And of course, this is contingent on the story being well written and the writer seeming like he knows what the fuck he's talking about. Unlike the medical aspects of this game, you can claim not to give a fuck what the writer says after the fact, but what these people say after the fact is the basis on which these stories move forward. The authors have control over the canon. If they say the vaccine from the first game was real, and the story of the second game continues on from that premise, then who are you to go online and scream that the second game is not canon? And what are you going to say about the third game when that one follows directly on from the events of the second? You see, it's no longer a matter of what the author said after the fact, or in interviews, or in some other way outside the story. The fact of the vaccine working is now baked into the story by what's written in the second game. You can no longer argue that the vaccine wouldn't have worked, only that the writers didn't do a good job of conveying that to the audience, that they didn't do a good job making it believable. You also can't justify Joel's actions by claiming that he didn't think the vaccine would work. At the beginning of the second game, he says they were going to make a vaccine.
They were actually going to make a cure.
So he believed it. So this makes his actions selfish, and it makes him a bad guy, which of course he already was long before the events of this game take place.
This is how you gonna repay me, huh?
Repay you?
For all those goddamn years I took care of us.
How did you know
Know what?
about the ambush?
I've been on both sides.
Took care. That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
So, you kill a lot of innocent people? I'll take that as a yes.
Take it however you want.
If you as an audience member are unable to accept the premise that Joel is a bad person, and that there are probably many people out there who would be completely justified in seeking revenge against him, then I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help you. I guess just don't buy The Last of Us 3. I am now more sympathetic to those people who don't want to believe the vaccine would have worked because of the poor writing of the medical aspects of the game. All of this could have been fixed by a simple montage. What they should have done, and by the way, I do know that this is pure fan fiction, and I know that I'm saying this with the benefit of 11 years of hindsight, but I don't care. Here's what they should have done. Joel wakes up in the hospital, and then you get a montage of Joel and Ellie living with and working with the Fireflies in the hospital, and all the Fireflies are very friendly, and they're all reading particle physics textbooks that they found at the university. And then you get a scene with the doctor, and he says something like, after all these months of testing and experimentation, I now know with 100% certainty that if I were to take the samples from the girl's brain, I would be able to make the vaccine. But the ethical implications of doing so without her consent, and also she's a minor, blah, blah, blah. And then Ellie comes in instead of Abby, and she agrees. And then you get a scene of Marlene telling Joel about the surgery, which is basically like this scene from earlier, and the rest of the story basically plays out the same as the game did. Until you get to the car scene, where you do the show version of the car scene, right? Because in the game, Joel tells Ellie there were other immune people, it wouldn't have worked, so we left. He doesn't tell her that Marlene and the doctor are dead, but Ellie desperately wants her immunity to mean something. So you got to put some more nails in the coffin. In the show, he tells Ellie it wouldn't have worked. Oh, by the way, while you were under anesthesia, some hunters came through the hospital and fucked everyone. So now Ellie truly has no hope for her immunity to be meaningful. Bit of fan fiction for you there. I think it would have fixed everything. Anyway, I still take issue with most of this guy's commentary, especially him not understanding how examples work. But I want to draw your attention back to this part of my response to his comments. You even go so far as saying that a vaccine was possible because the writer said so. Yet Neil admits he should have done more research. How do these two things contradict me, and how are they in conflict with each other? If Druckmann wishes he had done more research so that he could have written a better pseudoscience explanation of how the vaccine definitely would have worked, then that just proves my point. If this is true, that Druckmann wishes he had done more research to write the vaccine more convincingly, then maybe that retcon exists in the show. The scenes with Joel and Marlene in the hospital in the game and show are different. In the game, the doctor says, we don't know the cause of her immunity. The show says it is a chemical messenger that causes her immunity, so it seems more concrete. Is this now the canon of the story moving forward? I don't know. But I do still think it's the only way that Joel's actions have any real meaning. And I also still think this guy's crazy.